Welcome to the Winging It F1 podcast. It's just myself, Nigel and Freddie, today to talk about the Singapore Grand Prix, a mammoth Singapore Grand Prix, over 2 hours, bit of a delay as well, which made it over 3 hours, but we ended up with a winner, which was Sergio Perez's fourth one victory ever, the second of the year after Monaco, of course. Freddie, what did you make of a bit of a weird race, wasn't it?
It was a weird race. I think mammoth was a very good word to describe it, because of the way it just simply became such a behemoth of an afternoon. When you think, oh, it's a relatively early race for UK time zones, it's a 1 o'clock race, an hour earlier than the Europe time zone, and then it was an hour later, and you still had the whole ceremony around it. It kind of felt like you were there for quite a long time before any laps were turned, which is a bit. We've been there before. That's classic. That's normal. That's Formula One in wet conditions in the modern era. But I mean, I think that in the end, unfortunately, took away from the race and just the nature of a street track with no DRS for a long time and one single drying line made it kind of a bit weird and really hard race for the drivers, which I think was what gave it intrigue throughout. Because if you were just watching a car, you could see that it was a struggle and hard to drive. And for everyone, for the best drivers, which we'll get onto, because that was not an easy Grand Prix for anyone. And I think it's the most forgivable Grand Prix for every mistake possible I can remember in a long time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I just think, it became a bit. I was saying to Nigel before this podcast started, it's the race that to pique my interest most and lose it as quickly as possible that I can remember. Seems to be like, wow, this is happening, and it's be like, oh, and it's kind of like, okay, it seems to be you'd go from chapter to chapter with flashpoints that were then followed by so much sort of stagnation.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a proper driver's race, though, I thought, with wet conditions, drying out, and especially when they went on to dry tyres, the first 15, 20 laps, when they went on to dries and the track was still damp and very wet in some parts, it was pure. That is why they get paid the big bucks. We saw all the skill there, who could not put it in the wall, who could deal with the conditions, get the tyres into the right temperature. We saw all of that, and it's not often we see that in modern day F1, at least, especially at Singapore, one of the toughest tracks in the world, the most physical track of the calendar as well. So,
Singapore is the track where when it's a dry race, the leader drives for 3 seconds slower than they can do at front and just controls the race for a one stop and tries to make sure only one pit stop phase is required, so then they can just control the race. And we saw that in 2019, we saw that in 2018, with then having to just the odd safety car period just being able to control relatively easily, and that's kind of a trademark. That's why someone like Vettel has done so well at Singapore, because his trademark race is just to plant himself in the lead and just disappear, frankly. And that kind of can lend itself to losing the driver race of Singapore, which it has the potential to be, which is why the qualifying is amazing. I mean, I still stand by the 2019 pole lap of Charles Leclerc at Singapore being one of my favorite laps to watch of all time, because he seems to just nearly put it in the wall every other corner, and it's a dry qualifying lap and he's still got pole, so it just makes it amazing for me. But you had that on every lap of the race. I think it got to the point where with the Charles Leclerc and Sergio Perez battle, when they were on slicks for the first sort of 20 laps on that, after that safety car for Sonoda, that you could sort of figure out where they were going to overstep the mark each lap, but then be able to hold it. Leclerc was always sliding through turn 3. Perez was always going a little bit deep and a little bit sketchy on the bumps into not quite turn 5 a couple of times there, but also the straight in sector 2 after the Anderson Bridge. And that you could kind of figure out where the drivers were having their weaknesses, which is something you can only really figure out in a cockpit. So to be able to see that from a spectator's point of view was really interesting if you're that way inclined. It's very nerdy.
No, that's how me and you are. But of course, other people might enjoy F1 different ways. But Perez did win, great drive. But should he have won? Because we know he didn't respect the 10 car length rule. I saw it both times after turn 13. after the Anderson Bridge down to turn 50. I was watching it when it was live. I didn't see the second one where the steward said they had to give him a warning between turns 9 and 10, I think it was what they said. It might not have been shown on TV, to be honest. And when I did see it, but when I saw the other two, I thought he should have got a penalty. So for me, Perez should have been given 2 5-second time penalties. Instead, he has been given 1 5-second time penalty and a reprimand and 2 penalty points. What are your thoughts, Freddie? Do you think Perez should have been penalised?
Yeah, I think so. And it's a shame because, he did do really well in a really pressurized environment. But I think the way the safety car periods were then conveyed from his side really goes against what a safety car is. And it's very much viewing the competitive nature of the safety car and then trying to argue it as wet conditions. So it's a fine thing to do. But then when you're then very obviously then saying speed up and then you're very obviously going fast through points, like if you're going at racing speed through various points when you've caught up to the safety car, that completely negates the point of a safety car because you're going at racing speeds at parts of the track. Even if that isn't the part of the track where the incident is, it's when there's a safety car, that's when marshals can go on track even at various points. It doesn't just have to be at an unlocked area of the track. So you've got to kind of pay attention to that. And the safety car goes at a speed as well, because Sergio Perez was also ticked off for having a go at the speed of the safety car. That's going at a certain speed because that's the direct communication to race control. Sergio Perez isn't, the safety car is. So yeah, I think it was a deserved win, but it was also a deserved penalty, which is what makes it a shame. But one thing that ticks it in my favor on giving it to Perez is that when there was an investigation when he needed to turn it up to disappear, he did, and really just sort of found some pace that Charles Leclerc just couldn't find. And I thought that was very impressive, actually. I was very impressed with his final 5 or 6 laps of that race, because at that stage, that amount of fatigue to then be able to turn it up a notch, which he very obviously did, was very impressive. And it doesn't negate anything, obviously. It doesn't say, but he did this, so fine, don't penalise him. I just, as a, the next bullet point on my list, I guess. But yeah, it's annoying, but
would Leclerc have not driven differently though? Because he basically went all out attack to try and make the overtake. He probably could have done it if he didn't have a few corrections at like turn 3 at one point.
Turn 3 at every point.
To every lap, yeah. But like, would Leclerc, if Perez was given a 5-second time penalty in the race, which he should have done, or 2 5-second time penalties, Leclerc surely would have driven differently, and then Perez wouldn't have scampered up the road.
Totally, definitely. He wouldn't have cooked his tires. He would have just sat within 3 seconds or sat within 2 seconds, which he could easily have done. Wouldn't have cooked his tires earlier, which is very easy to do on such a weird tarmac they've got there. It's not a very abrasive surface, but when it's a greener track, when it's been washed consistently over the weekend, it will be more abrasive. And because tires are weird and tires exist. Don't ask me anything more than that. And but that's just voodoo about tires that's ticked off. And I think you're right. He probably would have won the race even if it was 1 5-second penalty. And the way that we saw with Perez in Bottas in Monza 2021 is the good of recent examples. He had no reason to overtake Perez to not be on the podium in that race, because Perez had go a 5-second penalty, so he could just sit there and got the podium. Same with Canada 2019, these kind of things. And those are harder calls of penalties, in my opinion, the ones they gave in those races. And this is an easier call. It's a slam dunk one when it's 10 car lengths. When the safety car's round the corner and you're at the other corner at various, that's when you've been behind the safety car. That's when you start to think, And Hamilton was alluding to it on the radio, I think, and saying the lights were going out, but he's putting a gap. And
what I don't get is his engineer, Perez's engineer, Hugh Byrne, just for the second one, he warned him saying, "Be careful of the safety car left," and he still did it. I really didn't understand that, because I don't know if he was warning him, if that was the warning from the FIA warning, if you get me, because that was the same safety car restart, or Hugh Byrne noticed the first safety car restart. Well, he got warned and he still did it. It's
probably a mixture of the two, in a way of just saying, okay, right, so do this thing to make your tires work, but don't do it to such an extent. and he just did it to too much of an extent. I think that's probably the thing. I think it's obviously a thing that keeps his tires alive, is doing a little bit of speed, doing a little bit of bursts, keeps the tires alive, keeps a lot of heat in the brakes, crucially a lot of heat in the brakes if you're then having to brake hard. So I think there's elements of that.
Last point on this, Christian Horner, as his response, did say before the penalty was given, but he said if Perez is given a penalty, normally that people escape these kind of things. He said on formation laps, other safety car things, like Houghton in Saudi Arabia last year, for example, the formation lap and that crazy race. Why wasn't people penalised then? And he's right, but people should have been penalised then. That's what I would say. So again, it's inconsistent, just like a lot of decisions have been this weekend. But it's a good point. But this one was very obvious, at least to me, when it happened.
Yeah, there's always a kind of a thought process of better start somewhere, and it seems to have. You could get the impression that it has started in Singapore, but it hasn't, because only one penalty was given. So it's weird.
What is the first one was worse than the second one, I thought. Yeah, he only got a reprimand for that and 5 seconds for the second. It's just like, what is going on there? How could you get a reprimand and a 5-second time penalty for effectively the same thing, nearly the same points in the track as well? It's ludicrous.
Yeah, ludicrous. It is, and
you just know.
I'm kind of speechless on it. I don't really have any answers to say, any reason why,
And if he won by less than 5 seconds, he would have been given two reprimands. That's what I genuinely think would have happened. But they just didn't want to rob him of the win.
Yeah, I think that's a really good. That's where I'm leaning as well, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, it's the harsh truth.
I hate to say it. I really hate to say it. I really hate to have faith, but I don't.
But that said, apart from that, it was still one of Perez's best drives, if not his best drive, which he said. I think.
Do you think it was his best win?
I don't think it was. I know he said that, but I don't think it was.
Because I think Sakir was brilliant.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I think as well. Because I think Red Bull in those conditions on Sunday had a slightly better car.
Yeah.
I mean, Verstappen in clean air. I know he's on soft tires, that kind of thing. He was like a second to near 2 seconds at some point faster than the whole field.
Yeah,
unbelievable. So no, I mean it's probably like his 3rd or 4th best drive he's ever done, but not his best for me. No.
But it was a very accomplished drive and very difficult conditions in a very difficult Grand Prix, and you've got to hand it to a few drivers who made it to the end of that race who did very accomplished drives, and you've got to take it away from a few others.
Absolutely. Leclerc and Sainz, actually, that kind of brings us on to that. Leclerc was very good, just as good as Perez, I thought. The only thing he did wrong was not getting the start right and overcooking his tyres. Although I do like that he kind of did attack and went for it. It didn't quite happen, though, unfortunately.
He was relentless, wasn't he?
Yeah.
He felt relentless. I think the start you can kind of take away from him as a criticism, because all the top few cars on that side of the grid, Hamilton and Alonso had sort of duff starts. So I think there was a tarmac change, I think, and I think it's just where they were entering their second phase meant it became a bit weird. I think that seems to be what it looks like, or maybe it was just a bit wetter at that part on weird parts of the track on that side as well, convoluted, mixing it all together. So, but it did look like that was a contributing factor, because obviously Perez, Norris, Sainz all got a good launch.
It was the second phase, wasn't it, for Leclerc and Hamilton? The second phase, the actual reaction, that was fine. But
the reaction was equal between Perez and Leclerc, and the reaction from Hamilton was actually phenomenal. It was
the best start
one of his best reactions in a long time for many people, I think.
Not bad for
considering
an old man.
That bit wasn't. But yeah, I mean, Leclerc was relentless throughout. I think he did cook his tires, but he had numerous opportunities even with those tires being battered, and I think he did give it a very good shot. Actually, I was very impressed with that. And
did he overdrive?
Yes, he did. I've said it a couple of times already, but just go and watch the race and just watch him go through turn 3 and watch the opposite lot, watch the sideways, because he's then coming up. That's the second to last corner before the main straight where you can do the overtakes with a little kink in it, the 4 to 5 straight, and he's just always slipping around, and it's just not on, in my opinion, because that's what's cooking his tires.
Slow. Yeah, absolutely. But Sainz, his teammate, he got third, but it was a bit like Bahrain actually. Right at the start of the year, got the podium, but his actual performance, his actual pace, was miles off compared to Leclerc. Even though Leclerc in practice on Friday he had a few issues, Sainz, I think top FP, top of my head, but then from qualifying onwards and then the race, Sainz was not quicker than Leclerc at any point. He just went backwards after every safety car restart.
He just wasn't getting a handle on it, was he? And we've seen it a couple of times. His pace in the race hasn't been amazing. I mean, Zandvoort, he was falling off a lot. Hungary, he wasn't there at all. And I don't know if it's what's the reason for it? It's to be every other race. He's not having a good race for some reason. It seems to be hitting a weakest ebb, which is very concerning, to be honest, because he's proved himself pretty well, but I don't really understand where that pace was for him. I don't. It's not a one-off now. No. It's not a conditions thing. We can't put it down to that. And he's worked in these conditions before. In Monaco, he was going very nicely, and he was able to think and had a very good race there. So, in my opinion, he was quite lucky to get a podium and quite lucky to realistically finish that race in a decent position, even in points-paying position. Because if he was in the midfield, he'd have been swallowed in that race.
I agree entirely. And that is, for me, the difference between Leclerc and Sainz. Leclerc doesn't...
Oh, but it's more than that, I think.
Oh, yeah, there's more, yeah. But this is the biggest factor for me. Leclerc, this doesn't really happen. Where on raw race pace, he's much slower than Sainz. I can't think of a time where that's happened, actually, over the last 2 years. Whereas Sainz, it does happen.
Yeah, definitely. It's when you think about Leclerc just being able to dig so deep, and I don't know if Leclerc's digging deep because there's a limitation to the car, but that doesn't ring true for where that car's been for the majority of the season. And it doesn't feel like it's a limitation Leclerc's overcoming. It feels like a limitation in Sainz's car, which is Sainz. And yeah, it's concerning and it's disappointing, and I don't really know where to go with that for Sainz. I think we need to kind of, if this is a trend that continues over the next few races this season, I think I know he's got a contract till 25, doesn't he, or 24?
Yeah,
and 24 season. So maybe the silly season rumor mill will be about Carlos Sainz next year.
Interesting. Well,
we haven't even finished this one yet.
Yeah, I know. Max Verstappen, he won't be going anywhere. Obviously, he didn't win the title. But he was obviously never going to win the title anyway. He didn't win the race either. Had one of his worst races, probably the worst race of the year for him. Do we think?
I think it was the worst race of him in 3 years.
Probably. But it all happened because of qualifying, which wasn't his fault. It was the team's fault because they wanted to get him last over the line, basically. And he was told by the team to slow down, make a gap to Gasly, etc., which he did. And that lap would have been, he was 7/10 up on Leclerc's pole lap on that penultimate lap. And then this last lap, he was 9/10 up after the middle sector on Leclerc. So he had 2 laps that were more than good enough for pole. Probably would have been on pole by more than 1 second.
Second and a half.
Both. Yeah, exactly. So if it weren't for that, he probably would have dominated. So it goes back to qualifying.
No, he wouldn't, because then Leclerc would have got the lead at the start.
Yeah, that's a good point.
No, he would have dominated.
But with what he had, with the situation he was in, he should have done better. That mistake with Norris. Well, before that, he was quite patient. I was quite impressed. He didn't do anything erratic. It was just that one move where he misjudged it on the wet stuff, which Hamilton did as well.
But that was a really bumpy point of track. That was really easy to lock up there in a dry condition. So in wet conditions with weird tarmac around it, because it's just we don't know what's been surfaced there recently, and with wet offline, that is a really forgivable mistake for Hamilton, Russell, Verstappen, whoever else went off there. Albon on lap 1. Everyone who went off there, I have huge sympathy for, because I do think that's the worst part of the track to have to brake on in general for an overtake. You're coming in at such speed, such speed, offline, wet, slippy tires, trying to find grip that don't have much temperature, that can't just rely on themselves. So particularly after a safety car restart, which is when he went deep, where the tires are going to be cold and the inherent mechanical grip is just going to be so lacking, is, it is a shocking mistake to see for a man so pristine with his driving usually, and so clinical with his overtakes as he has been this year, even in difficult places to overtake like Hungary and Zandvoort. But yeah, it's Lando Norris, I think, was very pleased with himself, to be honest.
And I wonder as well if Verstappen knew DRS was going to be enabled, which for some reason it took a long time to, because they're being safe, and that's what's happened over the last couple of races where the track's been dry. We saw that at Turkey last year, for example. I think if he knew DRS was coming, he wouldn't have gone for it as he did. I think he would have been a bit more cautious. But equally, he did have a run. It was on. It's just, it was so difficult. Wet tyres, dry track. Dry track, wet tyres, sorry. Yeah, it was just difficult.
I don't know if he wouldn't have gone for the move.
Yeah.
Because you can see, when you can see Ferraris and Red Bulls up front, you're going to think, I just need to be with them.
Possibly.
That's my thought on that. But
I think Norris actually positioned his car perfectly, like in the middle, to make sure Verstappen was on the wet stuff. So that was
a fantastic race, Norris.
Yeah, let's speak about that. I mean, he kept out the wall, which is the main point to do. McLaren's strategy as well, which got Ricciardo up there. They waited for the safety car from Sonoda. Was it Sonoda's one?
Yeah, Sonoda biffed it.
Sonoda crashed. They waited to pit till then. They were waiting for a safety car basically to go from inters to dry to get a cheaper pit stop, which is what happened, which meant Norris definitely stayed ahead of Verstappen and Hamilton at the time, and Ricciardo moved up to 6. So a great day for McLaren. Moves them ahead of Alpine as well in the Constructors' Championship. It's a top job to everyone, I think, there.
Oh, yeah, they took a good gamble on waiting for a safety car around that pit stop phase. I think they thought everyone's going on dries. It might be a good time. And I think they had that idea before the race, if I'm right in saying. Yeah. I would also say, though, that Norris was on for a top 5 finish anyway in that race.
Yeah.
And I think his performance in that car, which I think was not suited at all to this track, because of the conditions, he was able to launch himself up that order. I thought was very, very impressive. So either way, with the McLaren doing doing bits with their strategy, which is well done, because they launched up their second car and got a 4th, 5th, and Norris was then in the fight for the podium. But the fact that Norris was then able to push Sainz for the majority of the final stint of that race was excellent stuff, and I was incredibly impressed with that.
Yeah, very impressive. That's where the top drivers stand out. Ricciardo as well. Yes, he didn't have the pace of Norris, but he wasn't a million miles off. I mean, the gap.
The gap at the he had nearly a pit stop gap at the end.
Okay, never mind. I'll retract that.
Didn't he? Oh, one sec. I'll double check that, because I don't want to throw too much at him.
Oh yeah, it was 22 seconds.
Yeah, he was way off Norris in the end.
Never mind. All right, his pace wise, it still wasn't good. But people will look at his result, won't they?
Well, the result was good, and he held the result there, and he held the 5th place, and he held off Stroll.
Yeah, Stroll 6.
Yeah.
Stroll had a great race. He
had a cracker. Stroll had really good pace in the all weekend. Aston Martin had good pace all weekend. Aston Martin seemed to get a really good position in pre-practice with that car. Then they had a wet qualifying. Whenever they've got pace, like Silverstone or Canada, it's a wet qualifying. Like, oh, for goodness sake, Aston Martin, come on, we're sorry, but why are you bringing this luck to yourselves? But they made it work in the race. They got double points, 6 and 8.
Yeah, it's a much needed result for them as well.
Yes.
I think. So,
it's putting them in the fight for P6 in the constructors now, rather than the fight for last in the constructors, which was where they were in sort of race 4 or 5. And you look at the constructors standings now, and they are on, they're close to Alfa Romeo. They're 15 points behind Alfa Romeo, whereas previously, before this race, I think they were something like, they were 9th, so they're 7th now.
Yeah, so huge day for them, absolutely huge.
If they can somehow get sixth in this constructors championship, then I mean that's fantastic for Aston Martin in the second half of the season, and we should put a lot of credit to the development of that car.
Absolutely, yeah, because they changed car in Spain to a B-spec car effectively, because the first 3-4 races, it was not good. I mean, Australia, I remember, one of the worst weekends ever for any team I've seen in F1. But yeah, since Spain, they have managed they found a path. It seems like the car they've got now, it's got a lot of potential, or some potential.
It's a good race car. It's a good Sunday car.
Yeah, and they're now able to use that. And with Stroll, we've seen him wet before he can perform for some reason. Whenever it's wet, he just improves in general.
Yeah, so he's a low grip driver.
Yeah, maybe he should drive.
That's the thing with Stroll. I think it'd be fantastic. Yeah, it's something like that where he's got cold tires and put him in DTM or something. I think he'd be phenomenal because of the way it works for him. I think Stroll's going to be really interesting to watch when they get rid of tire warmers in Formula One.
That's a good one, which was going to happen this year, but then it didn't.
But that's one of my mad crackpot theories that won't come to pass. Will never be mentioned again.
Let's talk about Mercedes. Really bad, disappointed day all round for them. George Russell didn't get out Q2, started 11th, and then did. Actually, let's talk about this bit first. I'm surprised he decided to change his power unit, because 11th is not. I know you're in the middle of the pack, but to do it on Singapore, I found that a bit of a strange choice to put him.
So the reason he was having issues in practice and in qualifying apparently was because of some issues with the engine braking in the power unit, meaning the throttle power was essentially sticking. So I don't know if there was a bit of a misgiving with that power unit.
Yeah, he did.
You think they would go for one in the pool though? I don't know if that's an upgraded one, which isn't in the pool then, but who knows?
Possibly, but yeah, from FP1, he was all over the place, Russell, and then in the race, they pitted him far too early onto the dry tyres, and it didn't work. He had an incident with Mick Schumacher as well, which is very strange to get a puncture from two cars colliding like that, and then had to do the rest of the lap at 12 miles an hour. And then Lewis Hamilton had that mistake, of course, where he went off at turn 7 when chasing Sainz, and then towards the end of the race, he went deep in the next corner, turn 8, and let Verstappen through as well. He also complained a bit about strategy, used tyres, new tyres at the start. I think he wanted used tyres for better warm-up. It was a bit like Hockenheim 2019, I think, for Mercedes. Everything just wasn't really working, whatever they tried.
Yeah, it was. It was a bit, scrappy. I think what they were trying with Lewis worked, and they overruled him correctly, in my opinion, with whatever they did. But because he was in the same strategy hunt until he, put himself out of it with the turn 7 issue. That's fine. I've said before that's fine. But the turn 8 one was, not on. And even any move in that corner is surely not on when you're that far back as well. He's just dipping a nose in. I mean, I think he figured out when he was there that it wasn't on, and just was like, well, I'm going to have to exist now. And yeah, that was an error in judgment for him there, which was boggling. And Russell just couldn't hook it up. Couldn't hook it up all weekend. Had one of those block weekends that is rare for any driver in the top team, to be honest. For such a level that didn't hook up across anything, and
all over the place.
He'll be searching for answers, desperate to find them. I think this little braking problem through the power unit is a nice thing to cool his mind, and hopefully he'll be able to have a better run of it in Suzuka.
Yeah, and I know it's impossible.
Yeah, I was just going to say on his racing with Schumacher was I don't know. It doesn't quite sit right for me as a racing incident. That I was surprised it wasn't a penalty in his favour, because for Russell, because Schumacher doesn't have to. He can hold his line. He doesn't have to move because another car moves. He's entitled to sit where he is, and Russell, turned out to turn into the corner in the wrong way.
I agree. No, I'd agree with that. I think he should have been given a penalty And there was very little noise about it actually after the race, maybe because he's had a bad race or whatever. But if it was dry, I really do think Mercedes would have had a great chance of winning.
Oh, they had a great chance at the start of the race anyway. Yeah. I think it would have been really interesting to see when it was dry. I think they were going on about having really good long run pace in the dry, but the only long runs were George Russell and Carlos Sainz, and they both had shockers. So I don't know if George Russell and Carlos Sainz were matching each other, then who knows where Leclerc and Hamilton would have been, probably just doing random stuff anyway, but faster. So we don't know what the limit, where that would have been. I don't know. I've earmarked Suzuka for them anyway, but who knows? I don't think they're going to win a race. 5 left.
Yeah. Alpine had a very poor weekend. Well, not a poor weekend, poor Sunday as well. 2 engine problems, let's say, for Fernando Alonso. He was doing so well. He's keeping Verstappen behind, frustrated him a bit, and a knock on, he would have had points as well. So a massive missed opportunity for them, Freddie.
Massive missed opportunity, considering they've once again bungled a position in the Constructors' Championship. I mean, they've got the car to be 4th, and I think, on balance in points as it kind of sits throughout the year, in the next coming races, they should probably end up in 4th. But at this stage in the year, to be behind McLaren, who are a fantastic operational team, isn't very good. The fact that Fernando Alonso can walk around saying, I think I've lost about 50, 60 points this year. Just the fact that he can even say that, and even Fernando Alonso can say that with a straight face, at one point he probably did also suggest they would be fighting the Mercedes, which is, tall order. Like
that were a few races.
Well, that means he's giving himself 100 points or something, doesn't it? I mean, but yeah, I think a lot of the time we wouldn't be denying Alonso 30 or 40 of those points. So yeah. And the fact that it could, they suspect it to be relatively similar issues, that's not very nice for them at this late stage of the season, a particularly late stage in power unit development as well, for this near 10-year-old cycle of power units. So nothing more to say than that, apart from hopefully they just kind of can keep it together for their own sake, for 4th place, frankly.
Yeah, really bad day at the office for them, and Williams as well. Nicholas Latifi, I have no idea what he was thinking when he came across Zhou Guanyu at turn 5. He just, I know it's raining, spraying, that kind of thing, but he just completely cut across him, ruined his home race and Zhou's. And then Alex Albon had a bit of a moment as well at turn 8 and counted it. So then that put him out of the race as well. So yeah, could they have scored points, do you think? Possibly. It's hard to say, isn't it?
It's one of those races where you probably could have scored points staying in the race. Schumacher was flying with points till he was knocked by Russell, and Magnussen was nearly in the points after all of his calamities. So I think they realistically could have scored points had the green rubbed in the right way. But Latifi just had I want to say moment of madness, but he just had a moment of just lapse. It's just a lap. He was concentrating so much on driving, which is fair enough in those conditions. He just wasn't looking in his mirrors, which is difficult to forgive as well. And Albon just was struggling in a car that was a struggle. I think they're both struggling in a car that was a struggle. So to even race in that car is going to be really tricky, as Latifi found, and as Albon found on lap 1 as well. So
the car just doesn't suit Singapore.
The car just doesn't suit Singapore.
Yeah.
They were supposed to have a dire weekend, and they just did.
That's a great summary. Haas as well, I just want to quickly mention, if it wasn't for Russell and Schumacher colliding and the black and orange flag for Magnussen when was it Verstappen that he clipped his front wing?
I don't know who he clipped. I think it was Verstappen. I think it was, because Verstappen seemed to squeeze him at the exit of turn 9.
That was it.
A bit much, and that clipped him, and the end plate just got a bit loose again, which wasn't Magnussen's fault, wasn't really Verstappen's fault, because he did. It was very aggressive in a way that Magnussen has been as well. So, but I would just say I was very impressed with Magnussen's qualifying.
Yeah,
which made
absolutely,
it a
yeah.
shame because I think he was one of the top performers of the weekend on pace, frankly.
Yeah, to get into Q3 was a really good effort in that Haas. And this is, we talk about opportunities, but these are the types of races where a team like Haas, Williams, they can have a chance to get a top 8 and score a handful of points, which they can't really do on pure pace in a dry, normal race. So they'll be both really annoyed that they haven't been able to have a clean race, unfortunately, because it's unlikely that we're going to get another chaotic Grand Prix like this before the end of the season. So, yeah,
Is it? I mean, who
well,
knows?
you never know. But
Yeah.
yeah, missed opportunity there. And the last thing we're going to talk about before we round off is the delayed start. It was delayed for over an hour due to the heavy rain, but
It's an ironic thing to talk about it at the end of the podcast. You know,
that's a good point. The original start was pushed back, basically, because they wanted to do all the ceremonies and get the cars out on track and do it the normal way. Should it? Do we need common sense to apply, Freddie, or is it more important about, I guess, the contracts and that kind of thing?
I think the first point to make is that common sense was applied in not opening the pit lane. To be honest, with the torrential downpour, it takes, it's going to take a period of time to get cars to the grid and so on. And I think you've got to, there is an element of giving each Grand Prix their time in the sun, or the moon,
or the dark.
Yeah, and there is a MotoGP apparently have a quick start procedure. I don't know anything about this, I'm afraid. I've just seen this touted and suggested, but I also understand. I think particularly for Grand Prix where there could be fading light and things like that, and take Spa for example, if they'd been delaying the clock and things like that, but it did get to a point where they were able to go at it and do it and have the cars on the grid and were thinking about it, then just being able to have a good quick go button is a good idea. So a little urgent procedure might be a right idea. I do think, to be honest, in this situation it was fine. I think it was happened to the letter. We got the full race and so on, and that's fine. I think even with full extreme wet tires, which are not very good anyway, but even with full extreme tires that are good, the weather was at a point where you couldn't go to the grid with any good tire, to be honest, in a prototype Formula racing car. So when that was legitimately fine, even with full wet tires, you then just got to kind of just go with it as it goes, and that's how it went. To be honest,
the only thing I would say is at 1 p.m. UK time when the race was meant to start, the conditions were fine in my opinion. When the rain stopped, and then after 10 minutes after the rain stopped, it was fine. But then we had to wait another hour or so, which I think that can be cut in half of a quick start procedure.
That's fair enough.
That's what I'd do personally. But I also completely understand F1 doesn't want to get into a contractual fight with race organisers about not doing X, Y, Z.
And drivers don't need to drive to the grid.
Yeah, well, yeah.
But then again, I think you've got an element of like just asking all these people just to go and stand in torrential rain is pretty stupid and pretty poor form, to be honest, for anyone. So yeah, there are sides of it that are from that side, that are that front. So I think it'd be interesting. Reckon something will be looked into, but who knows? And for the handful of times where you want stuff to happen quickly, I mean, Formula One isn't there to race, to make the most of the rain when it rains, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like
the weather reacts around Formula One, and Formula One can react to the weather, but for the most part, weather is weather, and Formula One races are Formula One races. Then they're not mutually exclusive; they just happen. And the weather that happens. And if weather forces something to happen in a certain way, which is we have to just delay everything that we'd normally do, then where it is when you start is where it is when you start. There's no obligation to race in a certain condition.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's nice point, actually. Yeah, I couldn't put that better myself.
So I think some people do go on about, oh, you're wasting the rain. It's like, well, grow up.
No, that's the Freddie I like to see. Grow up.
Yeah, you just commended me for saying something really well and just say grow up. But thank you for the forward.
Yeah, thank you for my praise, which I don't usually give. But yes, we will be, of course, talking about the budget cap probably on Wednesday, if and when something is announced. It was a huge story ahead of the Singapore Grand Prix. Do you just want to comment quickly on anything, Freddie, about it? I mean, me personally, I just want to wait and see what happens. I've got an opinion, but I'd rather wait and see, like Christian Horner says, actually, see what happens and then say something, because I don't, we got to see what the FIA said. This is the first time we're seeing this put to test. And finance, one thing I will say, finance is so complicated that I'm not too surprised that this is happening.
As the UK government are learning right now, finance is incredibly complicated. I think
but it is, though, isn't it?
Yes. Oh God, yes. But I think I will say one thing. It's obviously more my field of expertise, which is character. But I'm so surprised by how blatant Toto Wolff is, but also similarly how defensive and bullish in defense Christian Horner is, which, I'd have more faith in Red Bull's finances details as from basically two, really, going for it opinions. I have more faith in the one who works for Red Bull, to be honest, to know about that than Toto Wolff. I think he can go on about something being an open secret, but
I mean, was it an open secret?
It was an open secret to people. Apparently, the people in the paddock had heard whispers and things like that, but it wasn't, enough to be reported and things like that. And I that's fair enough. We're not in the paddock day in day out, so we have to take people's word for that. And I'm inclined to wait. My feelings are that it's a really specific thing to come out.
Yes.
But also it's been so batted away that it keeps it open in my mind.
Yeah. Okay. Yep, that's a fair point. Yeah, we will go into detail on Wednesday when something is hopefully announced, because this could be a huge story for F1 sales. Going back to Spygate 2007, that kind of thing. It could be. I mean, 2021 is still making 2022. You could argue in F1.
Oh yeah, but I mean, the budget cap of 2021 was designed for 2022 anyway. To be fair.
That's a good point. Yeah. Cool. Well, my thanks, Freddie, for joining me over the last 50 minutes or so. We'll be back for Budget Cap and Japanese Grand Prix preview talk in a few days. So until then,
the grind is just on all the time with this, isn't it?
But we love it. So thanks for listening. We will see you in a couple of days.
Goodbye.